Lake Como was a mirror of silence that afternoon, the water flat and endless, reflecting a sky streaked with the last gold of late summer. The Prescott estate stood like a watchful sentinel above it all, with marble balconies, ivy-covered walls, and windows tall enough to echo forgotten conversations. Inside, the scent of polished wood and lilies lingered from the morning's ceremony, one attended by business elites, diplomats, and family members who toasted a union few truly understood. Damien Prescott hadn't smiled once. He stood at the far end of the study, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the lake as though searching for something he'd lost long before this day. The scar at the base of his neck, a pale trail that disappeared beneath the crisp collar of his tailored suit, itched beneath the weight of fabric and expectation. He had survived what many wouldn't, an accident that left his body stitched, together by surgeons and his soul unmoored. And now he was a husband, not by love, not by choice, but by agreement. Arya Chen had known what she was agreeing to. Her father, Ambassador Liu Chen, had orchestrated the match with the precision of a diplomat who understood power more than sentiment. And Arya, educated in the finest universities in Europe, composed and graceful, had nodded her assent with quiet dignity. 6 hours ago, they'd stood in front of a wall of gardenias, exchanging vows that Damien barely remembered. His eyes hadn't met hers, not really. His voice had been calm but cold. Even now, he couldn't recall the way she looked when she said, "I do." Only the sharp guilt in his chest that he was giving nothing in return. A knock echoed softly on the half-closed study door. "Dinner is being served," said Arya's voice, melodic and restrained. Damien didn't turn. "I'm not hungry." A pause, then. "Would you prefer a tray brought here?" "I said I'm not hungry." The door clicked shut. She was polite. That was the word that came to mind again and again. Unfailingly polite, not angry, not hurt. And that made it worse. If she had lashed out, if she had broken a glass or cursed him for his coldness, he could have felt justified in retreating. But instead, she gave him space and silence. As night fell, he remained in the study, untouched dinner growing cold in the dining room. Somewhere in the house, she moved, changing out of the wedding dress perhaps, unpacking, settling into this life that was no more than a contract. He heard faint music from a speaker down the hall. Classical, Chopin maybe, soft and distant. Eventually he made his way upstairs. The master bedroom was dimly lit. A soft glow came from a lamp beside the reading chair where Arya sat with a book in her lap. She looked up, startled but not surprised. "I wasn't sure if you'd come," she said. "I can sleep in the guest wing," he replied. Her gaze didn't waver. "This room is large enough, there's no need." She was already dressed in a modest silk robe, her long hair tied loosely. The tension between them was not born of anger, but of unfamiliarity. He realized with an uncomfortable awareness that they knew almost nothing about one another. "Not really. I'll take the sofa," he offered. "No," she said, closing the book gently. "That's unnecessary." He hesitated, then nodded. She disappeared into the bathroom. When she returned, he had already arranged a pillow and blanket on the chaise near the window. She didn't argue. She simply turned off the lamp and slid into bed. The only sound was the hum of cicadas beyond the window and the slow ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hall. In the dark, he listened to her breathing, steady, unafraid. He didn't sleep. The next morning, the estate was quiet. Staff moved like ghosts through the halls. Damien sipped coffee in the solarium overlooking the lake. Arya joined him, dressed simply in linen and holding a notebook. "May I sit?" she asked. He gestured to the opposite chair. She opened her notebook and began sketching, seemingly content with the silence. Damien glanced at her once, noting the precision of her lines. Trees, stones, parts of the estate garden. Her hands moved with the calm confidence of someone used to stillness. After a moment, she said, "The view is different here. Sharper, less forgiving." He didn't reply. "I once studied architecture," she continued. "I thought I'd design libraries, spaces that breathe." She paused. "But I chose diplomacy instead, like my father. And now you're here. Damien said, unable to mask the bitterness. She looked up, eyes steady. I chose this too. You chose a stranger. I chose possibility, she corrected. He couldn't argue with that. That evening, guests from the wedding slowly began to leave the estate. Aunts and uncles, investors, politicians. Arya said goodbye to each with practiced warmth. Damien stood at a distance, letting her carry the weight of courtesy. When the last car pulled away, he retreated to his study again. There, he found a small envelope on the desk. It was unsealed. Inside, a simple note. I will not chase you, Damien, but I will not pretend we are only shadows sharing a house. When you're ready, I'll be here. He set it down carefully, unsure why his throat had tightened. Days passed. Damien worked from home, avoiding unnecessary travel. Arya kept herself occupied, painting, restoring the old greenhouse, reorganizing the library. They crossed paths at breakfast, exchanged words over dinner. Slowly, the emptiness between them filled with something like familiarity. One night he found her barefoot in the solarium, painting with the doors open to the lake breeze. She didn't hear him approach. The canvas before her was almost abstract. Broad strokes, soft edges, and a sky filled with conflicting light. It's the storm before the storm, she said without turning. He stepped closer. What does that mean? Sometimes the tension is louder than the thunder. Their eyes met. For once, neither looked away. Later in his room, Damien stood in front of the mirror. He unbuttoned his shirt slowly, looking at his reflection under harsh light. The scarring was thick over his right side, shoulder to waist. His hand, stiff from surgeries, flexed awkwardly. He thought of her hands, of the gentleness in her voice, of the strength in her silence. He turned away from the mirror. But the image stayed with him. The final week of August brought the first signs of autumn. The wind had a new bite. The lake grew darker in the evenings. Arya began gathering fallen leaves, pressing them into her notebook, cataloging color and shape like memories. Damien found her one morning beneath the cherry tree they had planted after the wedding. It hadn't bloomed yet. He watched her for a long moment before speaking. You could have had anyone. I chose you. He nodded, once the words too large for his throat. That night, when she passed by the study, she found the door slightly ajar. Inside, Damien was reading one of her sketchbooks. He looked up, surprised but not defensive. I used to write, he said simply. Poetry. Do you still? Not since the accident. You should. He didn't reply. But when she left, he reopened the drawer where his old journal lay, untouched for years. He wrote one line. She walked softly through rooms I thought were empty. And for the first time in a long time, Damien Prescott allowed himself to believe in the quiet possibility of beginning again. The morning light filtered through the gauzy curtains of the Prescott estate with a gentle insistence, as though even the sun was hesitant to disturb the delicate tension that had settled over the household. It had been a week since the wedding, 7 days of polite distance, 7 nights of separate rooms, of footsteps muffled by thick rugs, of conversations limited to the bare necessities. Arya Chen stood in the kitchen, her fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee. The lake outside shimmered in the early light, impossibly still. She had taken to rising early, long before the staff began their quiet routines, to find a sliver of solitude in this vast and echoing home. Her sketchbook lay open on the counter, a half-finished charcoal drawing of the estate's east garden, capturing the somber charm of the ivy-draped columns and silent marble paths. The sound of footsteps on the staircase made her pause. Damien, she could always tell it was him, the measured rhythm, the hesitation at the third step. She reached for a second cup, poured the coffee black with a touch of sugar, and placed it on the marble island. Then, instead of slipping away as she had done every morning before, she waited. When he appeared in the doorway, dressed in a charcoal gray Henley and dark jeans, his expression froze for a moment at the sight of her still standing there. Morning, she said softly, her voice like a stone skipping across a still pond. Morning, he replied, glancing at the cup before his gaze flicked back to her. I thought, maybe we could have breakfast together. He looked at the clock above the sink. I have a call in an hour. It's 6:30, she said, not pushing, merely stating. We have time. Damien hesitated, then crossed the room and took the offered seat. Arya smiled to herself, a small, private triumph. She placed a plate of fruit and a basket of warm bread between them. No grand gesture, just a quiet offering. They ate in near silence at first, the kind that wasn't entirely uncomfortable but was still marked by caution. Damien picked at a piece of bread, his gaze shifting occasionally to the lake through the windows, then back to the woman sitting across from him. I spoke to my mother yesterday, Arya said eventually, her tone casual. He looked up, something unreadable in his eyes. And? She asked how we were settling in. Damien's grip on his cup tightened ever so slightly. What did you tell her? Arya met his gaze. I told her the cabin is beautiful, that you're very busy with work. That's accurate. I didn't tell her that my husband treats me like a polite stranger avoiding rent. The sharpness of her words was softened by her calm delivery, but it landed all the same. Damien set his coffee down with a quiet click. I never pretended this would be more than an arrangement. No, she agreed. You didn't pretend at all. You just assumed. He didn't respond. His jaw clenched. She could see the wall. Going up again. You made decisions for both of us, she continued, her voice still even. Decisions based on your fears, not on anything I ever said. Damien pushed back his chair, half standing. I have work to do. Arya let him go. She didn't follow, didn't call after him. She sat in the kitchen alone, listening to the quiet return. For a moment she questioned whether she had pushed too hard, but the answer settled over her like dust in the sunlight. No. 7 days of silence had yielded nothing. Something had to change. Outside, the lake was waking. A breeze ruffled the surface, sending light ripples across the mirror-like water. She slipped on her sandals and walked to the shoreline, her sketchbook in hand, her heart heavy with things unsaid. From his study window, Damien watched her. He saw her pause to collect smooth stones from the beach, saw the way her dress caught the wind, the way she crouched to sketch the shoreline. Her presence was a quiet ache, always there, always waiting. He should have felt justified in keeping his distance, should have believed he was protecting them both, but her words from breakfast echoed louder than reason. Cowardice, she had said. And though it stung, he knew she was right. She wasn't cruel. She was clear. She hadn't come into this arrangement blind or naive. She had given him space, had honored boundaries he never explained, and now she was asking, gently, persistently, to seen. Later that afternoon, a knock interrupted his video call. He muted the microphone and opened the door to find her standing there, car keys in hand. I'm going into town for groceries, she said. Is there anything you need? He noticed she had changed. Linen pants, a simple blouse, her hair pinned back. A small gold stud in her nose caught the light when she tilted her head. No, thank you, he said. She turned to leave. We're out of coffee beans, he added quickly. The Ethiopian blend, if they have it. She turned back, surprised. Then she smiled, a genuine, heart-bright smile. Ethiopian it is. The door closed behind her, but the smile lingered in his memory like a sunrise. He returned to his desk, but his mind drifted. He thought of her dimple, how he hadn't noticed it before. He thought of her patience, of her quiet strength. That evening, he found her in the sunroom, curled on the window seat with a book. The fading light painted her in warm golds and soft shadows. He held 2 mugs of fresh coffee, the aroma filling the room as he stepped inside. She looked up, startled. I brought you one, he said, offering a mug. Thank you, she replied, accepting it with a tilt of her head. I didn't expect. I wanted to apologize, Damien said, taking the armchair across from her. For this morning, Arya sipped her coffee, watching him carefully. You don't have to apologize. I do. You were right. I've been avoiding you. It's not fair. She didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "I told myself it was about giving you space," he said. "But it wasn't, it was fear." She set her mug down, folding her legs beneath her. "What are you afraid of?" He looked at his hands. The scars had faded, but he still noticed them. That this might become real, and that if it does, it could be taken away. "Pain doesn't vanish when we avoid connection," she said gently. "It just hides until it has nowhere else to go." He looked up. "Can I ask you something personal?" She nodded. "Why did you agree to this? You could have said no." "I was curious," she answered. "My parents described you as brilliant, principled, intense. I wanted to see who that man was. And I stayed because I believe in things that grow slowly." He swallowed. "Even things like this?" "Yes. Especially things like this." Silence fell, but it wasn't empty. It was reflective. Something shifted in that room, not dramatic but essential. Space between them narrowed. She stood after a while, her book still in her hand. "Good night, Damien," she said as she walked past. He caught her hand for a heartbeat. "Thank you," he whispered. Her smile was quieter this time, but no less warm. "You're welcome." She left the room, and Damien remained, staring into the darkness with something new burning in his chest. Not regret, not sorrow, but hope. Faint and fragile, but real. Rain had a rhythm all its own. On that particular night in Lake Como, it arrived like a symphony, beginning with a soft hush on the glass, then building into a full crescendo as wind swept through the hills and thunder murmured behind the clouds. The storm had been forecasted for days, yet when it finally descended upon the Prescott estate, it felt sudden, intimate, like something meant only for the two people inside. Damien stood by the window of his study, watching the drops chase one another down the pane. His laptop screen still glowed behind him, emails left unanswered, documents half read. But his focus had frayed long before the storm had begun. His thoughts were on Aria, had been for days now. In quiet and insistent ways he didn't entirely understand. He had started noticing things, the way she hummed softly when painting, the way she read aloud to herself in the sunroom when she thought he wasn't nearby, the exact sound of her laugh, rare but warm, a spark in the dark, and more than that, he noticed the ache in his own chest when she left a room, when he found a note she'd left beside his tea, when he realized he was waiting for her presence before acknowledging his own. That night, drawn by the scent of cedar and the low warmth of the fire, he stepped into the living room to find her seated on a nest of cushions. The hearth glowed behind her. She wore a soft, oversized sweater and thick wool socks. Around her were books, dozens of them, their spines worn, their pages curled at the edges. And beside them, a bottle of red wine, 2 glasses half-filled. Aria looked up as he entered. "You're just in time," she said with a smile that was real, not rehearsed. Damien hesitated, then slowly crossed the room. He sat beside her, careful to keep a polite distance, but something in the curve of her body, in the softness of her eyes, made the space between them feel less daunting than before. "What's all this?" he asked. "Poetry night," she said, lifting a thin, weathered volume. It seemed appropriate with the storm and all. "Poetry?" he repeated, almost laughing. "It's been years since I read any." "Then you're overdue," she said, offering him a book. He took it, the leather binding cool in his hands. She began reading first, a piece by Warson Shire, raw, vivid, unapologetically emotional. Her voice carried the words with clarity, not performative, just present. Damien listened, the fire's crackle marking the space between lines. When she finished, she looked at him. "Your turn." He opened the book she had given him. The page she'd marked was from a Ghanaian poet, a piece about dawn and the heaviness of beginnings. The words felt strange on his tongue at first, but as he read, they began to settle, as if they'd been waiting in him for a long time. When he looked up, Aria's expression had changed. There was no pity there, no admiration either, just attention, like she was seeing something true. "I used to write," he said quietly, closing the book. "A long time ago, before the fire. Do you still have them?" He nodded. "Somewhere," You should share one with me. I don't know if I can. Then let me go first, she said. She retrieved a slim notebook from beside the cushion and opened to a page she had folded in half. Her voice trembled only slightly as she read, I wear your absence like a second skin, stretched across the places you haven't touched. I dream of hands that reach but never close, and build a house out of almosts and ifs. She stopped there, closing the notebook softly. Damien said nothing for a long time. The poem struck something unguarded in him. He recognized himself in those lines, not just as subject, but as author. It was his absence she was speaking to, his distance. You wrote that about me? He finally asked. I wrote it during our second month, she said, when I realized how loudly silence can hurt. He stood without speaking, disappeared down the hallway, and returned minutes later with a weathered leather-bound journal. Without a word, he opened to a ribbon-marked page and handed it to her. His last poem, written before the accident. She read silently. It spoke of standing on a precipice, unaware that life was about to shift, of loving the sound of fire without ever suspecting how it would sound up close. It ended with a line that made her chest tighten. I was not afraid of endings until the light changed shape, and I forgot the color of my own voice. When she looked up, tears had gathered in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. You still write, she said, even if you don't hold a pen anymore. He sat beside her again, closer this time. I stopped because I didn't know who I was after, he confessed. Then write as the man you are now, she said. Let him have a voice too. The firelight flickered between them. The wine warmed their hands. They began reading more, alternating voices, sharing favorite lines. Words filled the room like a bomb, like a bridge. When at last the storm reached its peak, thunder clapping directly overhead, the lights briefly flickering, Damien laughed unexpectedly at Arya's sudden yelp. You're scared of storms? He teased. Not scared, she said, mock defensive, just respectful. Well, you have nothing to fear here, she raised an eyebrow. Because you'll protect me? His smile faded slowly, replaced by something softer. Because you're not alone. They fell quiet again. At some point, without realizing it, their shoulders touched. She leaned her head against him. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply let it happen. Let her happen. And when she eventually fell asleep beside him, breathing slow and steady, her notebook still open in her lap, Damien sat still for a long time, watching the fire die down, listening to the storm, holding the moment like something fragile and irreplaceable. He didn't know what would come next, but for the first time since the fire, he wasn't afraid of finding out. Under the soft veil of midnight, the pool behind the Prescott estate shimmered like a quiet secret. The water, warmed by hidden coils beneath its surface, reflected the stars above and the silhouette of the grand, ivy-covered house behind it. The storm had passed, leaving the air electric, the earth saturated, and the sky cleared to 1,000 points of quiet fire. Arya stood at the edge of the pool, her robe slipping from her shoulders, her skin catching the faint glow of the outdoor lantern she'd lit in delicate defiance of the dark. It wasn't planned, not exactly, but something inside her had stirred. After that night of poetry, the closeness, the shared vulnerability, the way Damien had begun to lower his guard. She wasn't foolish enough to believe everything had changed in a single evening, but the shift had been undeniable. And so, with gentle purpose, she created an invitation, not of words, but of space, of silence, of presence. She left her swimsuit, where he would find it, on the bathroom counter beside the folded towel he used every evening, a deliberate omission, a silent message. Then she stepped into the pool. The warmth embraced her immediately, a soft contrast to the crisp night air. She submerged to her shoulders, her arms folding across her chest more out of habit than modesty. Around her, the garden was still. The vines hung heavy with rain, and the scent of soaked earth drifted on the wind. She set 2 wine glasses on. The edge of the pool filled one and waited. It was almost 20 minutes before she heard the deck door open. Her heartbeat quickened, but she didn't turn. She already knew it was him. Damien's footsteps paused. When she finally glanced over her shoulder, he was standing at the threshold, framed by light, holding the black swimsuit she had left behind. He was dressed, as always, too carefully, long sleeves, even in this heat. His expression was unreadable. "You forgot this," he said, his voice even. "I didn't," she answered, just loud enough to be heard over the breeze. Silence stretched between them, taut and unspoken. Then he stepped forward slowly, setting the swimsuit down on a nearby chair without another word. She watched his movements, the stiffness in his limbs, the way his eyes stayed on her face and not her shoulders, not her skin. There was caution in him, but something else too. Curiosity, hunger, fear. "I can't," he said after a long beat, gesturing vaguely to his own covered form. "You don't have to," she replied. "You can just sit, share the air." Another pause. Then, with quiet precision, Damien removed his shoes, rolled up the legs of his trousers, and sat on the edge of the pool. His feet slipped into the water. She saw his jaw tighten as the warmth touched him. It was something. Not much, but something. Arya floated closer, not too close, offering the second glass of wine. He took it with a small nod, holding it with both hands like something precious. "Tell me about Tokyo," she said. He blinked, surprised. "Tokyo? You mentioned once that you lived there briefly after grad school. I want to know what that was like." So he told her about the strange calm of the subways, the way vending machines sold hot drinks in winter, the quiet reverence of temple gardens tucked between skyscrapers, and the loneliness, the way being surrounded by so many people could still feel like being on a distant moon. Arya listened, floating gently nearby, occasionally moving her fingers through the water to keep from drifting too far. She didn't press, didn't lean, and she simply let him talk. And slowly the words began to unwind him. After a while, the glass in his hand emptied. The tension in his shoulders had lessened, if only slightly. His sleeves were damp now from splashes, but he didn't seem to notice. "There's a piano in the boathouse," she said suddenly. "I found it a few weeks ago." Damien turned to her, brows drawn. "It probably hasn't been tuned in years." "Still," she said, her voice light, "it's waiting." He didn't reply, but his eyes lingered on hers a little longer this time. Then they dropped to the water. "My scars," he said abruptly. "They go beyond what you've seen." "I know," she answered, her voice never wavering. "You don't have to show them to me to prove anything. I haven't been in water, not like this since the hospital. Therapy pools don't count." "I'm not asking for more than you're ready to give," she said. "But I'm here if you want to take that step." He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the quiet slosh of water against the pool walls and the distant rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, almost without warning, Damien stood. Arya instinctively turned away to give him privacy. She heard the rustle of fabric, the soft intake of breath, then the sound of water being disturbed as he stepped in. When she turned back, he was submerged up to his chest, his face pale, but his gaze steady. His right arm was exposed, the one he never showed. The scarring was extensive, twisting across skin and muscle, an intricate map of pain and survival. Her chest ached at the sight, but not from pity, from awe. "You're brave," she said. "No," he murmured. "I'm tired of hiding." They stayed in the water for a long time after that, not touching, not rushing, just two people in the same space, finally without walls. Eventually, she floated beside him, close enough that she could hear his breath. She didn't reach for him, but her presence was an invitation. And slowly, delicately, Damien reached beneath the water and brushed his fingers against hers. It wasn't a claim. It wasn't possession. It was a question. Arya answered with her own hand, intertwining their fingers beneath the surface, letting him feel her acceptance through contact rather than words. Later, when they emerged from the pool, wrapped in towels and silence, they didn't speak of what had happened. They didn't need to. The space between them had changed. The distance had shortened. The fear had lessened. And that night, when they returned to their separate rooms, Arya carried a quiet smile with her to bed, a smile born of patience, of progress, of trust finally being returned. Damien, alone in his room, touched his fingertips to his palm where her hand had rested, and for the first time in years the scars didn't feel quite so heavy. The days that followed their midnight swim unfolded with a gentle intimacy that neither Damien nor Arya dared to name. Mornings began with shared coffee, no longer in solitude but at the small oak table near the window, where the sun carved golden lines across the floor. It was a fragile peace, built on whispered thank yous and the occasional brush of hands as they passed each other dishes. They no longer avoided eye contact. They met it carefully, holding each other's gaze just a second longer than necessary. It was in these seconds that something real took root. Damien had begun to change in ways that startled even himself. The long sleeves stayed, but sometimes he left his scarred forearm exposed when they sat reading together. When Arya entered a room unexpectedly, he didn't flinch or hide. He simply acknowledged her with a quiet nod or a softer glance. His walls weren't gone, but they had windows now. And Arya, ever patient, never tried to climb over them. She simply stayed, offering moments of peace where once there had only been silence. One morning, after Arya had gone into town for groceries, Damien decided to clear the mail. He rarely did it himself. The housekeeper or the assistant usually took care of that. But today he felt the itch to move, to do something tactile. Bills, newsletters, an invitation to a foundation gala he knew he wouldn't attend. Then, among the envelopes, one caught his eye. It was addressed to Arya in a looping hand, postmarked from Accra. His first instinct was to set it aside, but something about the handwriting, the weight of the paper, gave him pause. He left it on the kitchen counter, unspoken and unopened. Later, as he searched for a project folder in the sunroom, Arya's sketchbook fell from the shelf. Loose pages scattered, and among them was a letter on cream-colored stationery. He bent to gather it, meaning only to stack it, but the first line caught his eye like a knife. "My dearest Arya, I still cannot accept that you've gone through with this arrangement." It wasn't curiosity that made him keep reading. It was the way her name was written, with possession, with pain, with a familiarity Damien had never dared claim. The letter, penned by someone named Kofi, spoke of a shared history, of years spent building a future, of dreams and plans and betrayals. It was raw, unapologetically emotional, and utterly devastating. By the time Damien finished reading, he felt unmoored. 3 years. That was how long they'd been involved, if Kofi was to be believed. An entire life before him, filled with passion, with commitment, with promises. And now Damien, half a man, scarred and cautious, was what she'd chosen instead. Or settled. For the thought scalded him. When Arya returned that afternoon, she found him in his study, the door shut, something he hadn't done in weeks. She unpacked the groceries in silence, her movements precise, aware of a shift she couldn't name yet. When they sat for dinner, his answers were clipped, his eyes distant. "Did something happen while I was out?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "You received a letter." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "From Accra?" "Yes." I left it on the counter. Her gaze flicked toward the kitchen, then back to him. "Thank you." "And from Kofi," he added, his voice sharp, with something between accusation and hurt. Arya set her fork down. "You read it?" "It fell from your sketchbook." The first line was hard to miss. He met her eyes, and I read the rest. The air between them changed, thickened. "You shouldn't have," she said quietly, not with anger, but with disappointment. "I know," Damien replied. "But I did." He pushed back from the table. "You had a life with him, a future. What are we, Arya, a placeholder?" Her face fell, not from guilt, but from something deeper, sadness. "You think I would go through all of this, move to a foreign country, marry a man I barely knew, live in silence with him for months, Just because I had no other choice, didn't you? He shot back. You left someone who clearly loved you for this. Why? Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress. Because it was never what you think it was. 3 years is a long time to be unsure. I wasn't unsure, she said. I was clear. He wasn't. Damien's silence urged her to continue. Kofi is my cousin, she said finally. Not by blood, but by life. We grew up together, studied together. Yes, we had a bond, something strong. But he always assumed it would become more. That I would follow the path he imagined. He never asked what I wanted. She stood, retrieved the letter from the kitchen counter, and brought it back with her. He wrote this because I never gave him closure. I didn't owe him that. I chose to marry you, Damien. Not because I was forced, but because I believed in the man I met once in San Francisco. A man who stood in front of a crowd and spoke about ethics and innovation like they were sacred. You inspired me before you ever knew my name. He was quiet for a long time, the truth disassembling his assumptions one word at a time. I didn't know, he said. Because you never asked, she replied gently. That night, he didn't retreat into his study. He sat beside her in the sunroom, the letter forgotten between the cushions. They didn't speak more of it, but the air between them no longer crackled with blame. Something deeper had taken its place, an understanding, tentative but true. Later, when he watched her sleeping, her back rising and falling beneath the blanket she had pulled to her chin, Damien felt the weight of his own silence over the past weeks. He had let his fear of being unwanted define every moment with her, and now he saw how unkind that had been, not only to her but to himself. He touched her hand in sleep gently and whispered, I'm still learning how to be seen. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, and for once that was enough. Chuang Ti Ding Duan. The morning after their confrontation unfolded slowly. The storm clouds had cleared, and sunlight bled across the hardwood floors of the cabin. Damien sat at the breakfast table long before Arya stirred, the untouched coffee in his hand cooling by the minute. He had spent most of the night awake, replaying their conversation in his mind. Every word, every expression, the revelation that cracked through his assumptions like thunder splitting a tree. He had seen her anger, yes, but more than that, her honesty. Her exhaustion from being misunderstood, from being judged by someone who claimed to be too broken to judge, and underneath it all, her quiet pain at not being seen for who she was. He wasn't angry anymore. He was ashamed. When Arya entered the room later that morning, wrapped in a light sweater, her curls pulled into a loose knot, he stood reflexively. She paused, uncertain. But Damien stepped toward her before she could speak. I'm sorry, he said simply. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened. She nodded. May I show you something? He asked. They walked in silence through the hallway to his private study, a space she had never entered. The room was modern but warm, filled with books and framed patents, a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the lake. In the far corner stood a leather-bound trunk. Damien opened it, slowly revealing stacks of journals, diagrams, photos, and clippings. This is who I was, he said, before the accident. She approached cautiously, touching the pages gently. You're still this man, she said. I didn't think I was allowed to be, he replied. After the fire, after the pain, I shelved every part of myself that didn't serve survival. But the truth is, I miss him. The man who created without fear, who lectured about technology not just as a tool, but as a moral responsibility. Arya flipped through one of the journals, notes scribbled in the margins, half-drawn schematics. Energy-efficient prosthetics, solar neurology networks. This work, she murmured. It's brilliant. I abandoned it, he confessed. Not because it lost value, but because I thought I had. I stopped writing, stopped reading anything that reminded me of who I was. It hurt too much. She turned to him. Then, full of emotion, you can reclaim this piece by piece. He gave a small laugh, but it was soft, not bitter. Maybe. But I want to do it differently this time. I want to share it. not hide behind it. For the rest of the morning, they pored over his ideas together. Arya asked questions, sharp, curious ones, and Damien answered with a passion that startled even himself. She didn't just listen, she challenged him, pushed his ideas further. It was the first time in years he felt the surge of creation without, the shadow of shame looming over it. By late afternoon, she rose from the armchair and looked out over the lake. "Come with me," she said. He followed her to the dock, where they sat with their feet dangling over the water, the sun beginning its slow descent. "There's something I haven't told you either," Arya began. "Back in Accra, I had the chance to attend MIT. Kofi and I both got offers, but I turned mine down." Damien's brows furrowed. "Why?" "I didn't want to spend 5 more years being seen only through his lens. Kofi's mind is brilliant, but he never saw me as separate from his plans. When your name came up in a partnership conversation between our families, I asked to be introduced. I wanted to meet you. Again." His breath caught. "Again?" She smiled faintly. "San Francisco, 2016. You gave a talk at a university ethics panel. You probably don't remember. I do. You were the only speaker who refused to sign a consulting deal with a firm that had ties to surveillance tech. You said, 'Just because we can build something doesn't mean we should.' That stayed with me. I wanted to know the man who lived by that." He stared at her, stunned. "You found me before I ever saw you." She nodded. "And when I saw you again after the accident, I knew. You were still the same man, just hidden." There were tears in his eyes, though he didn't shed them. She had seen him long before. He knew he needed to be seen. As the sun dipped beneath the hills, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson, Damien did something he hadn't done in years. He reached for her hand and held it openly. That night, he didn't go back to his study. Instead, he helped Arya prepare dinner, their movements synchronized, easy. They shared stories over wine, funny, awkward ones from their childhoods. They laughed, and later, without speaking, they sat close on the couch, listening to old jazz records on vinyl until the fire in the hearth began to die down. The letter, from Kofi, once a source of turmoil, now lay tucked away in Arya's drawer. Not forgotten, but no longer dangerous. Its power had been broken by truth. When they finally said goodnight, Damien hesitated outside her door. "If you'd let me," he said, "I'd like to keep choosing you, every day. No more assumptions. No more fear." She opened the door, little wider. "I've been choosing you since San Francisco," she whispered. And in that quiet moment, with the storm long past, Damien Prescott realized that the woman he had kept at arm's length was never an intruder in his life. She was the only one who had ever truly knocked at his door, and waited patiently until he was ready to open it. The storm arrived on a Friday evening, as forecasted. But no prediction could have captured the weight it carried, not in thunder or rainfall, but in what it would undo between Damien and Arya. By then, the rhythm of their life together had subtly changed. Damien had grown more comfortable in her presence, more willing to offer small pieces of himself. They read side by side in the evenings now. He brought her tea without being asked. She no longer walked with caution through his spaces. He had invited her in. And yet the closeness bred a kind of tension, like a bow drawn taut but never released. They hovered in the fragile intimacy of almost, neither one willing to reach for the final thread. When the warning came through the emergency alert system, severe winds, potential flooding, risk of power outages, Damien didn't panic. He moved with measured precision, checking supplies, starting the backup generator, ensuring the windows were sealed. Arya, for her part, battened down the deck furniture, stored firewood indoors, laid extra towels beneath the entryway. They worked together wordlessly, a team shaped by months of coexistence and evolving trust. By nightfall, the storm broke over the lake like a war drum. Wind rattled the windows, rain slashed sideways across the glass, and thunder shook the wooden bones of the cabin. The generator flickered twice, then died. They lit candles, checked flashlights. The world outside became a deafening symphony of nature's power. But inside, something quieter began to stir. When a leak in the ceiling forced them to move from their separate rooms to the only space fully dry, the master bedroom, Damien hesitated. "You can take the bed," he offered. Arya shook her head. "We're not strangers anymore, Damien. Let's stop pretending we are." He stood there for a long time, unsure of what to do with the invitation in her voice. Calm, not urgent. Respectful, not demanding. Finally, he nodded. "I'll take the other side." They changed into warmer clothes. Arya in thick cotton pajamas, Damien in a t-shirt and sweatpants. Even in the dim candlelight, Arya could see how carefully he avoided turning so that his right side was visible. The scars still haunted him, not because they repelled her. She had already memorized their topography in brief glimpses, but because he still feared what she might not say. As they lay on opposite sides of the wide bed, the air between them held more weight than the storm outside. Arya stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind lash the trees, and then gently broke the silence. "When I was little," she began, "my grandmother used to tell stories during storms. She said they were meant to remind us of what mattered, the things that didn't blow away when the winds came." Damien turned slightly, surprised by the sound of her voice, so calm, almost wistful. "What kinds of stories?" "Tales of women who turned into birds, trees that remembered names, spirits who only appeared during thunder. And always there was someone who survived the storm and saw the world differently afterward." He didn't speak, but she felt his attention, the way his breath slowed, the way the bed shifted slightly as he turned a little more toward her. "You're still cold," he observed, a note of concern in his voice. She nodded, though she hadn't intended to let it show. Without another word, he moved closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel the change in temperature between them. "Turn away," he said quietly. She did, and a moment later she felt his arm, tentative. Careful, settle across her waist, not possession, not romance, just warmth, just presence. "Is this okay?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. Outside, lightning forked across the lake, illuminating the room for a split second. In that brief flare of light, Arya saw the look in his eyes. Not fear, but longing. Not for her body, but for the safety she offered. For the chance to be near someone without needing to hide. His body was warm behind her, strong and hesitant. They didn't speak after that. Words were too fragile. But slowly she relaxed into him, her back pressed lightly against his chest. And slowly Damien breathed easier. For the first time since the accident, he let someone lie against him without pulling away. When the storm outside began to ease, the storm within him didn't vanish, but it softened. The walls, the armor, the layers of silence that had once been his only safety net. They began to dissolve. Arya didn't sleep at first. She lay there with her eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of his breath. His arm stayed where it was, not heavy but grounding. And though nothing about the moment was overtly romantic, it was more intimate than anything they had shared. It was a beginning, a crossing of a line neither of them had dared to draw. Later that night, Damien woke to find her still curled beside him, one hand resting loosely on his own. Her hair fanned across the pillow, her mouth slightly open in sleep. He studied her, not with the fear of being watched, but with the reverence of seeing something rare and true. He didn't want to ruin the quiet, but something stirred inside him, something that had stayed buried since the day the flames took more than just his flesh. Something that had no name but needed breath. So softly, so quietly, he said, "Thank you." It wasn't until the next morning, when Arya found herself alone in the bed, that she realized something had shifted. His pillow still held the impression of his head. His warmth still lingered in the sheets. She wrapped the blanket around her and sat there absorbing the memory of the night, the storm, the touch, the stillness. Downstairs, she found Damien in the kitchen, coffee already brewed. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing, and for the first time he didn't look away. They didn't mention the night directly, but it hung between them, a new thread in the fabric of their connection. Not yet a pattern, but the first of many stitches. As they sat drinking in silence, Arya noticed something else. His right arm, resting on the table, uncovered. He hadn't noticed, or if he had, he didn't seem to care. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The fact that he allowed it meant more than any compliment ever could. Then Damien cleared his throat. "I need to go into Seattle today," he said. "Some equipment at the lab was damaged in the storm. Will you be gone long?" He hesitated. "A few days. There's also a conference I should attend." She nodded. "Of course." He didn't explain further, and she didn't press. But she knew. This wasn't just about the lab. This was space. This was him retreating to process what they had shared. At the door, suitcase in hand, he paused. "I'll call," he said. "Come. Back when you're ready," she replied gently. There was a moment, half a heartbeat, where he looked like he might say something more, but instead, he reached up and touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers. Just a whisper of a caress. And then he turned, walked to the car, and disappeared down the driveway. As the wind picked up again and the lake reflected the fading gray of morning light, Arya stood alone in the doorway, her hand still warm from where he had touched her. She wasn't afraid of his silence anymore. She understood it now. It wasn't absence, it was preparation. A space between beats where something stronger might emerge. But she wouldn't wait passively. She had something to say, too, and this time she would say it her way. Once Damien left the cabin felt too still. Arya wandered through the space, her steps silent against the polished wood floors. Every room held traces of him. His books in the study, his shoes by the door, the sweater he'd left folded neatly on the armchair. She touched the fabric, pressed it to her face, then set it back down. This wasn't grief, she reminded herself. This was space, intentional, chosen distance. But even knowing that didn't make the silence any easier. That afternoon, she went out to the dock and sat with her sketchbook. The lake had settled into a mirror, reflecting the first hints of autumn. In the trees, the air smelled of pine and rain. She tried to draw, lines of trees, shadows of clouds, but every time she looked down, her pencil drifted into something else. The curve of Damien's shoulder, the ridges of his scars, his hand resting against her waist in the dark. She hadn't imagined the tenderness in his touch, nor the way he'd stayed close despite the discomfort she knew it must have caused him. His heart had not been closed, only guarded, and that night during the storm he had let her in, just enough to matter, just enough to hope. Arya stood and went back inside. She needed to do something, not to win him, not to chase him, but to speak to him in the only language that had ever seemed to work between them. Intention, presence, meaning. She opened the drawer of her nightstand and pulled out a stack of letters she'd written over the past few weeks. Some of them Damien had seen, some he hadn't. There were entries from evenings when they hadn't spoken, notes she had penned after watching him at work, or hearing his voice carry through the walls when he thought he was alone. They were too intimate for conversation, but perhaps they were perfect for something else. She laid out the pages, reading through them, adjusting phrasing, rewriting parts that felt unfinished. Then she folded each one carefully and began to place them in deliberate locations. One on the kitchen counter by the coffee canister, one on the piano bench in the boathouse, one tucked into the pages of the poetry book he had read aloud from by the fire. Each letter, a breadcrumb. Each one a whisper of everything she hadn't been able to say aloud. The final letter, however, was new. She wrote it late that evening, by the light of a single lamp in the sunroom. It was shorter than the others, but every word mattered. Damien. If you found this, then you know I've been speaking to you all along, just not in the way you're used to. I needed you to see that I've never viewed you through the lens of damage. I've seen you. The full spectrum. The man who thinks deeply, who hides pain behind silence, who gives more than he believes he has. I never asked for your scars to disappear. I only asked to be trusted with their story. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. I'll be at the rooftop garden of the Hotel Azure in downtown Seattle. Come if you're ready to listen, not just to me, but to yourself. Arya, she sealed the envelope, wrote his name on the front, and placed it beside his favorite tea tin in the pantry. The next morning, she packed a single bag and drove into the city. Seattle greeted her with a soft gray sky and the scent of brewing coffee drifting through the streets. She checked into the hotel early, requesting access to the rooftop garden. The concierge was kind, the view stunning. From the terrace, the bay shimmered in the distance, ferries cutting paths across the sound. Arya stood there for a long time, imagining Damien's face if he saw it, how he might describe the interplay of light and water, how his mind would interpret it as both beauty and equation. She spent the day preparing, not her clothes or her makeup, but her heart. She visited a small bookstore and bought a new poetry collection. She wandered the Pike Place market and bought flowers, tucking a single bloom behind her ear as she had when she was a girl. She ate lunch alone, smiling at couples walking by, grateful even through the ache in her chest. When evening came, she returned to the rooftop, set a single chair beside hers, and waited. Down at the cabin, hours earlier, Damien returned. The drive had been uneventful, the city useful, the conference well organized, but none of it had quieted his mind. He had missed her in ways he hadn't thought possible. Her voice, her presence, the quiet hum of her energy in the same room. The absence was physical. It wasn't just silence. It was subtraction. When he opened the cabin door, the first thing he saw was the letter, Arya's handwriting, his name. He opened it slowly, then another and another. Each one led him deeper into the house and deeper into her heart. Her words were simple but powerful. Observations, vulnerabilities, truths. By the time he reached the final envelope, sitting beside his tea, the pressure behind his ribs was impossible to ignore. She had left him something more than letters. She had left him a choice. He sat in the kitchen for a long time, the clock ticking steadily. Then he rose, and he went to find her. Back at the rooftop, Arya checked the time again, 5 minutes to 7. Her heart beat like a metronome, not with desperation, but with hope, with the ache of someone who had spoken her truth and could only wait now to see if it would be heard. As the minute hand moved closer to the hour, she looked up at the sound of footsteps. There he was, Damien, in a black coat, his hair tousled by wind, his eyes searching, and then softening when they landed on her. She stood slowly. He crossed the space between them, unsure of what to say. "I found the letters," he said quietly. "I hoped you would. I hoped you—" He studied her for a long moment. "You knew I needed to read them, not hear them. I think we both needed that." He looked past her to the empty chair, then back at her face. "May I sit?" She nodded, and when he did, she reached into her bag and handed him the new book. "No more secrets," she said. "You can read first this time." He opened the book, found the marked page, and began. His voice was steady, rich, warmer than the wind. And beside him, Arya smiled, watching the man she had always seen begin to unfold fully, sentence by sentence, into the man he had always been. The storm had passed. The silence had broken. And at last, something true had begun. The air in Seattle carried a crispness that hinted at the changing seasons. Leaves, tinged with gold and amber, fluttered down the sidewalks, mirroring the transformation unfolding within Damien and Arya. After their poignant reunion on the rooftop garden of the Hotel Azure, a new chapter began, one marked by vulnerability, understanding, and the tentative steps of rebuilding. Back at the lakeside cabin, the atmosphere had shifted. The once silent rooms now echoed with laughter and shared conversations. Damien, who had previously cloaked himself in solitude, found solace in Arya's presence. He began to open up, sharing stories of his childhood, his passions, and the dreams he had shelved after the accident. Arya listened intently, her eyes reflecting empathy and admiration, never pity. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Damien retrieved a worn journal from the bookshelf. He handed it to Arya, his fingers brushing hers. "These are my sketches." he said softly. Designs I abandoned after the fire. Arya opened the journal, her eyes scanning the intricate drawings of prosthetics, sustainable housing models, and innovative energy solutions. These are incredible, she murmured. You have a gift, Damien. He looked away, the flickering flames casting shadows on his face. I lost faith in myself. Arya reached out, placing her hand over his. Then let me help you find it again. Inspired. By her encouragement, Damien began to revisit his projects. He set up a workspace in the sunroom, the natural light illuminating his renewed dedication. Arya joined him, offering insights and suggestions, their collaboration weaving a tapestry of shared purpose. As days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. They cooked meals together, took long walks by the lake, and spent evenings engrossed in books and discussions. The cabin, once a refuge of isolation, transformed into a haven of connection and creativity. Yet, amidst the serenity, a letter arrived, an invitation to a gala in San Francisco, celebrating innovators in sustainable technology. Damien hesitated, the city holding memories of his past life and the accident that had altered his course. Arya noticed his apprehension. You don't have to go, she said gently. But if you do, I'll be by your side. Damien nodded, the decision weighing heavily on him. It's time I faced it. The gala was held in a grand hall, adorned with shimmering lights and elegant decor. As Damien and Arya entered, conversations hushed, eyes turning toward the man who had once been at the forefront of innovation. Whispers of admiration and curiosity filled the air. A former colleague approached, extending a hand. Damien, it's good to see you. We've missed your brilliance. Damien offered a modest smile. Thank you. It's been a journey. Throughout the evening, Damien navigated the event with Arya's unwavering support. They engaged in discussions about sustainable initiatives, reigniting Damien's passion for making a difference. Later, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, Damien turned to Arya. I never thought I'd find my way back. Arya leaned into him, her voice tender. Sometimes it takes losing everything to discover what truly matters. He looked into her eyes, gratitude and love shining through. You've been my compass, Arya. She smiled, tears glistening. And you've been my anchor. Returning to the cabin, they resumed their work, launching a foundation dedicated to sustainable innovation and community development. Their days were filled with purpose, their nights with shared dreams and quiet contentment. One morning, as the sun cast a golden hue over the lake, Damien knelt by the water's edge, a small box in hand. Arya approached, curiosity in her eyes. Damien? He stood, turning to face her. Arya, meeting you changed my life. You've shown me strength, compassion, and the courage to dream again. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down her cheeks as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Their wedding was a simple affair, held by the lake with close friends and family. Vows were exchanged under the open sky, their promises echoing with sincerity and hope. As they danced under the stars, Damien whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." Arya rested her head on his shoulder. Always. Their journey, marked by trials and triumphs, had led them to this moment, a testament to resilience, love, and the transformative power of connection. As autumn unfolded around the lake, painting, the trees in shades of fire and rust, the cabin became more than just a home. It became a sanctuary where healing took place in quiet, unnoticed moments. Damien and Arya's relationship deepened not only in passion, but in companionship. They moved in rhythm now, a gentle give and take of space and presence. One chilly afternoon, Arya found herself in the boathouse, standing before the old piano. Dust had gathered along the keys, but she pressed one down softly. The note rang clear. She played a second, then a third. Damien appeared in the doorway, watching her, his eyes reflecting a distant memory. "I didn't know you played," she said, her fingers resting on the keys. "I haven't in years," Damien replied. "After the accident, I told myself it didn't matter anymore. But it did," Arya said, turning to him. It still does. He walked to her side and sat on the bench. She moved aside to give him space, but he didn't push her away. He let his fingers hover over the ivory keys, then slowly pressed them down. The melody was halting at first, unsure. Then it grew stronger, fuller, as muscle memory kicked in. Arya said nothing. She simply watched him rediscover a part of himself he had long buried. When the music faded, Damien rested his hand in his lap, his eyes glassy. That felt like touching something sacred. Because it is, she said softly. That music is still inside you, just like everything that made you who you were before. It never left. In the weeks that followed, the piano became a regular part of their evenings. Damien played while Arya sketched, the fire crackling behind them, their silence no longer heavy, but full of shared comfort. It was during one of these nights, while he played a soft jazz tune, that Arya placed her sketchbook in his lap. Inside, she had drawn him, not just his face, but his form as she saw it. The gentle set of his mouth when he was focused, the curve of his shoulders when he relaxed, the texture of his scarred skin captured with tenderness, not avoidance. At the bottom of the page she had written, "This is how I see you." Whole, Damien closed the book and turned to her. "You always show me more than I'm ready to see." Sometimes we need someone else to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves. Their days were not without tension. Old wounds do not heal without discomfort, but they had developed the emotional vocabulary to navigate conflict. When Damien grew quiet, Arya no longer mistook it for distance. When Arya retreated into her art, Damien knew not to press but to offer quiet companionship. These small understandings became the foundation of something enduring. Then an email arrived. It was from a university in Zurich, an invitation for Damien to join an international research panel on sustainable innovation. They had read his recent papers and were aware of the foundation he and Arya had launched. They wanted his voice, his expertise, his vision. Damien stared at the screen for a long time. He showed it to Arya that evening, his voice subdued. "They want me to fly out. I'd be gone 2 weeks." Arya looked up from her tea. "Do you want to go?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to say no, the other part—" He trailed off, unsure. "You don't need to stay here to prove anything to me," she said gently. "I fell in love with a man who was never afraid to look forward. If this is what you want, go. I'll be here when you come back." He exhaled deeply as though her permission had released something inside him. "I'm scared to leave you." "You're not leaving me. You're carrying me with you." The trip to Zurich was more than a professional success. It was a personal turning point. Damien stood before a room of global experts and spoke with clarity, conviction, and confidence. His scars were visible, his voice firm. He didn't hide who he was anymore. Instead, he led with it. His story, once a source of shame, had become his credibility. By the end of his keynote, the room erupted in applause. When he returned to the cabin, it was snowing. He stepped through the door to find Arya waiting with hot cocoa and a blanket. They didn't speak right away. He simply pulled her into his arms and held her. "You were brilliant," she whispered. "I missed you every moment," he replied. They sat by the fire, sharing stories of his trip and her time in solitude. Arya showed him a new series of paintings, large canvases filled with abstract renderings of nature in winter, stillness, reflection, resilience. One evening, Arya brought out the old wedding dress she had never worn properly. It was simple, elegant, nothing extravagant, but it had waited long enough. She didn't say anything. She just let Damien see it. He understood instantly. 2 weeks later, they stood together on the frozen shore of the lake, surrounded by a handful of close friends. The ceremony was quiet, heartfelt, officiated by a local judge who knew the family. Damien wore a charcoal suit, his scars exposed, his posture proud. Arya, radiant in her gown, walked toward him barefoot in the snow. Their vows carried not just in words, but in every step they had taken to reach this moment. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, he said, "I don't just love you. I trust you." "With all that I am," and she replied, "I don't just choose you, I believe in you, with everything I have." As they kissed, the wind picked up slightly, sending soft snow swirling around them like confetti from the heavens. Later that night, they lay in bed, fingers intertwined. The cabin, now their home, was filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace. Damien turned to her, his voice quiet. "You saved me." "No," she said, pressing her lips to his scarred shoulder. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you you were worth saving." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Gentle, steady, cleansing. A new beginning in every flake. Damien and Arya had begun as strangers brought together by obligation, pushed apart by fear. But through storms and silences, letters and glances, they had built something real. Not perfect, not easy, but true. And in that truth, they had found everything. Just when life had finally found its rhythm for Damien and Arya, a single phone call shattered the calm like glass hitting stone. Damien was reviewing designs at the cabin when his phone buzzed. On the other end was a trembling voice, his estranged mother whom he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. "I saw you on the Zurich broadcast," she said. "Damien, you have a brother. He's ill. He needs a transplant, and you're the only match." The words stunned him. A brother he never knew existed? A family secret buried beneath years of silence and resentment? The revelation sent Damien spiraling. Arya found him staring at nothing, eyes dark with turmoil. He told her everything, his voice thick with confusion and disbelief. "You always said you had no one left," she whispered. "I thought I didn't," he replied. "Now, I don't know who I am anymore." This moment forced Damien to confront a painful past he'd buried alongside his scars. Should he help the brother he never knew, from a mother who abandoned him, or walk away to protect the fragile peace he had fought so hard to build? As snow began to fall again outside the cabin, a new storm gathered. One not of weather, but of identity, betrayal, and sacrifice. Would this pull Damien and Arya apart, or show them both that the courage they found in each other could withstand even deeper trials? To find out what Damien chooses and how it transforms their lives, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating powerful emotional stories like this one. Let's keep the journey going, together.